everyone, welcome to today's lecture. So today we'll be looking at universal design and how it is relevant to the area of interaction design. So universal design is basically creating environments, products and services for people which will be accepted by a large number of people and will be usable by a large population. So now here we do not consider age, gender or any kind of ability or disability to be the hurdle for them to use it. It should be usable by people across all ages, genders and their different abilities, and also that the should not need to adapt to certain specialized design, in the sense that people who have, for example, different abilities. So our product services should be useful for them equally, as well as for the other individuals who are not having any kind of a disability or any other age or gender related issues. So, universal design is the design and composition of an environment which can be accessed, which can be understood, and which can be used by people to the greatest extent as much as possible. And now, this could be a building, this could be a product which people frequent or use. So, you may recall that nowadays, all government buildings in India, it is mandatory for them to have a ramp for people to enter and exit the buildings. So even if there is nobody on a wheelchair or crutch who is accessing that building, or anybody who works in that building with that kind of a requirement, but still the ramp is now a mandatory feature to be added onto the buildings if they do not have that already. And of course, people consider, or generally we think, that this is only to accommodate a minor group of people, that why go to that extent to just accommodate the needs of a handful of people. But it is not just about the handful of people, but these services also make lives, or these additions that we do, whether it is a in the building or whether it is a product that we are designing, which is designed keeping the universal ability of people in mind. So it also is beneficial for people all around, not just the handful of those people. Now here we can see that what's necessary for all. So in this diagram we can see that what's necessary for some is good for all. So now it may be that a certain group of people, they have a very specialized type of requirement, but that requirement may be also good for all. So the example that I would like to give here is that of the OXO peeler. So this OXO peeler came into being because the designer who designed it, his wife had arthritis in her hands, and when she was peeling the fruit, of course the peelers were of a different design at that time in early 90s, 80s, late 80s and early 90s. So she was peeling, and because of the arthritis, she was having difficulty in peeling the apples. So that is when her husband thought of designing a peeler with a grip that would accommodate her requirements, and that peeler handle was chubby, which could be held very easily in her hands. So of course it was designed keeping a certain requirement in mind, but nowadays that OXO peeler is very popular and is being used by many people around the world, whether they have the requirement because of being arthritic or not. So it tells us that it may be necessary for some people, but it is good for all. So that is what the universal design is all about, that it may have sprouted from a need that we saw in some people who need a certain thing. But once we get into the process, we realize, and the output, it tells us that it is desirable by a lot more people, not just those smaller number of people. So now when we are focusing only on people, for example, who need something, who have, for example, say a disability, then it also brings unnecessary focus on that particular group. Now, when we talk about having a society which is equal, now there, when we are sort of talking about one small section of the population as them being different from us, so that is where the stigma also comes into being. That stigma being some sort of a mentality which is us versus them. And this kind of mentality, of course, is never healthy, and it can never lead to a country which can, improve and stand on its own, feet. So, for that particular reason, just considering the marginalized population is not a very good idea to begin with. So, to have a broader perspective when it comes to offering these services or designing these products is always the right way to go about. So, for the same reason, universal design, on the other hand, wherein on one we are sort of categorizing this particular section of people, universal design seeks to provide improved usability and safety for all groups of people for the community. So, here we are not just focused on one group and making them stand out, but we are looking at the entire community's well being. So, here are some of the principles of universal design. So, we have equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for approach and use. So, the first principle of universal design is the equitable use. Now, equitable use, as the name suggests, is equity or equality. So, now the design which is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities, so it is useful by equally by all types of people, whether they have disabilities, whether they don't. And the guidelines for this principle is to provide the same means of use for all users, identical whenever possible, equivalent when not, and also to avoid segregation or stigmatization of any user. So, here we are not wanting to isolate a user group or stigmatize the user group. So, that is what is to be avoided. Provisions for privacy, security, and safety should be equally available for all users. So, that is a right which everyone has, which is to have privacy, also security and safety, and make the design appealing to all users. So, of course, we have discussed about aesthetics in the earlier lectures, and we know that aesthetics are very subjective, but still all attempts should be made to ensure that the design is appealing for all users and it is desirable by a larger number of people. So, the next principle is flexibility in use. So, flexibility meaning that it should be easy to use in the sense that it could be used in many different ways. So, the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. So, we can see here in this diagram that this is a pair of scissors. If you recall earlier, there used to be these scissors which mostly the tailors used to use, and they used to be right handed. So, it used to assume that everybody is right handed, but that is not the case. So, a lot of population is left handed as well, and for left handed people, using the scissors meant for right handed was very difficult to use. To adjust the hand according to the scissors was very difficult to accommodate. So, now we have these scissors which can be used by people with who use right hand or left hand. So, for ambidextrous people we have these scissors, and also apart from this, to provide choice in method of use. So, how can it be used? So, the example being the scissors, and many other such examples will come to our mind where we can see that how one object or product can be used by many different types of people. Accommodate right or left handed access and use that we saw, facilitate the user's accuracy and precision. So, how can the product allow for the precision that is required for the job or for the work that the user is doing, and provide adaptability to the user's pace. So, how it can adapt itself to the user's speed. So, the next principle is simple and intuitive use. So, simple we all understand, and it's always good to have a simple design. Simple is actually very difficult to achieve because in simplicity lies the ease, and contrary to one may think, but when we say make it simple, make it further simple, it is actually quite a difficult target as opposed to making something more complex. Now, intuitive is something which is understood intuitively. So, for example, there are people who are very intuitive, they can understand the feelings and emotions of others very easily as opposed to some other people. So, similarly here the design has to be simple and intuitive. So, meaning that the use of the design is easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skills or current concentration levels. So, there are some products which when we are using them, we don't know what is the left or right or up or down and where it is to be operated from. Should I press this button or that button? So that is the kind of confusion that we do not aim for. So we are looking at intuitive design, wherein the design should communicate to the user that how it is to be used, and wherein the user's certain skill sets or their knowledge should not be a barrier for them to intuitively understand that how this product is to be used. And for that to happen, the product also needs to be simple to some extent. So eliminate unnecessary complexity. So if there is a complexity in the product that is not really serving any purpose, then of course eliminating that would be one step to go about it. Be consistent with user expectations and intuition. So we have seen some examples earlier also, that if on an app, if the cart is on the top right of the page, then on the next page also the user will expect it to be there. Now if the cart moves to the bottom of the left page, then of course it is going to be very confusing for the user. So for the same reason, we have to be consistent with the user expectations and intuitions. The next point is to accommodate a wide range of literacy and language skills. So if it is a product wherein the user is interacting with it, so of course by including languages, multiple languages, so that the user from whichever background they are coming, they are able to understand and operate it. So that is of course desirable. Arrange information consistent with its importance. So the hierarchy, that how is the information to be presented and how the user is to access it. So of course on the any device, for example, there will be a main switch, a bigger switch for power on, and then we will have some other like volume and other things. So the hierarchy of these should also be very clearly mentioned there. Provide effective prompting and feedback during and after the task completion. So at points the user may want to be given some kind of a direction, they may be feeling lost, and the system should be intuitive enough that they are able to feel that gap between the user and the system itself, and it is giving them a prompt, whether it is before, during or after. So for example, nowadays there are these shopping applications, shopping websites, and when we are hovering over the website, so they are working smoothly. But then when we just go towards the top bar where we have the button to cancel or log out, so then the website prompts us with a question, are you leaving already, or something like that. So because it senses that now the user's mouse is moving on to the top, wherein the user can close the window in which they are right now browsing, or they may log out. So when the mouse is hovering over that area, so it gives a prompt to the user. So something of that nature, something which is intuitive, that when the user feels lost or confused, so there could be a prompt that do you need help, do you need assistance. So something like that would really be beneficial. The next principle here is perceptible information. So now the design communicates necessary information effectively to the user regardless of ambient condition or the user's sensory abilities. So whatever information is to be communicated to the user should be effectively communicated. And now this is the concern of the designer, that how do they communicate this, even if the user has some kind of sensory abilities are compromised, or there are some other special needs, then it is the job of the designer to consider those in the design process. So now some guidelines here are to use different modes. So pictorial, verbal, tactile. So these modes, any of these modes can be used in addition to the standard communication that they are using. And this is used for redundant presentation of essential information. So the information which is not communicative with the user, or the user is not able to understand, so there we can take help of these additional modes. The next is to provide adequate contrast between essential information and its surroundings. So this is a very important rule in the visual design space, wherein the figure ground relationship becomes very important. In order for us to find something, the contrast really helps us. So if for example there is a table with a black top table, and there are all these black remote, black pen, all these items are lying, and in contrast there is a yellow pen which is lying on the table. So we will quickly be able to identify that yellow pen faster than we will be able to identify the black pen on the black table. So similarly for the designer, when they are displaying some information, then they have to ensure that certain contrast is maintained so that the user is able to identify the important information that is presented. The next point is maximize legibility of essential information. So legibility, readability, it has to be ensured. Now the factors which govern this are the font size, the font style, so whether it is block letters, whether it is cursive, whether the size, how much is the size of the text, for example, or even the, the whether it is serif or sans serif. So will it make it more easy to read or difficult to read? Will people, for example, with dyslexia, will they be able to read a serif text better or sans serif text better, or for other abilities as well? And the next point is differentiate elements in ways that can be described. So meaning that we have to give the directions or the instructions properly to the users so that they are able to find their way around, and what different things mean. If they have different meaning, then is it coming across to the user or not? So the next principle here is tolerance for error. So which means that the design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. So we also discussed earlier that how error is something that is really important to be removed, because error or hazard may not be like a physical hazard, but it can also be something that one does by mistake on the application or website. So for that to happen, so that we are not creating any kind of hazard, so the guidelines for that is that arrange elements to minimize hazards and errors. So which means in a hierarchy that most use elements, most accessible, and then eliminating the hazardous elements, and which can be isolated, can be shielded, so they can only come forth when they are like really required. So for example, the delete button or cancel, so you see that it is always in a different color than the color which says okay or go ahead. So the cancel or eliminate is always in a bright red color usually, because the red color stands for danger. We associate the color red with danger also, and something that one should at least be careful of. So then how are we placing these? How are we shielding this particular hazard so that by mistake we are not doing some kind of error? And when we are looking at the most used elements, then we are looking at making them more accessible so that they are easily accessible by people. The next is to provide warnings of hazards and errors. So the system should be again intuitive enough to provide those warnings of hazard or errors, that if there's an error, it should be communicated to the user. If there's a certain hazard, again the user should be intimated of that. Next point is provide fail-safe features. So as much as possible, it should be the effort of the team to provide fail-safe measures wherein the failure should not even take place in the first place. So all those efforts should be first put in that direction. And finally, discourage unconscious action in tasks that require vigilance. Now, we have discussed earlier as well that sometimes because of being overburdened or being tired or due to other maybe some illness, we may take certain steps or unconscious actions by mistake that may lead to this hazard that we're talking. So how can the system discourage this unconscious action in the task so that the hazard does not take place? So for example, I have probably given this example earlier also, that when we are sending an email without a subject, so our email prompts us that do you want to send this email without a subject? So, or if we are forgetting the attachment, it reminds us, do you want to add an attachment? So how this error or this potential hazard can be, we can bypass it. So coming to the next principle of universal design, which is low physical effort. So the design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with a minimum of fatigue. So of course we want the user to not overexert themselves. We want them to make the minimum action and get the maximum output of that action. So here the guidelines are to allow user to maintain a neutral body posture. So when we are using products in an environment, for example, you can see in the image there is a door handle here. So how do you maintain the natural body posture while we're opening the door? How much force is it exerting on our, which muscle of the arm is required to open it? So we can see here the way this person is trying to open the door, and this is what most of us tried to do during COVID. We were not trying to touch things, we were trying to find ways to, with our elbows or with, just the back of our hand, to touch lift buttons or the door handles. So is the door handle here, can this be opened the way the person is pressing it? So now probably this handle does not allow the user to open it like that, but we have to see that how the minimum effort can do that, not only for situations like COVID, but also for people like elderly who have a lower muscle power, or children, or even people with certain disabilities. So can they also use these products with minimum effort? The next point is use reasonable operating forces. So again, it is similar to what we said, that maintaining a neutral posture in addition to the force. Of course, if the body is not in neutral position, of course more force may be required. So that is why the neutral body posture is required for the person to not injure themselves. The next point is minimize repetitive actions. So even if the posture is neutral and the force is in the prescribed limit, but if the person is repetitively using the same motion, that may also cause musculoskeletal disorders. So how do we control this repetitive motion as well? And also, so that the ergonomic issues or ergonomic problems may not manifest in the person. And the last point here being minimize sustained physical effort. So of course the breaks are required at certain durations, so that the person is able to regain their, the energy levels. And how can the activity while they're performing, then also the activity, the it does not require physical effort which is sustained, but is also sort of giving them a break in between. So the seventh principle is size and space for approach and use. So this is the appropriate size and space are provided for approach, reach, manipulation and use regardless of the user's body size, posture or mobility. So we have to ensure that the person is able to access. Now here many things are important, and one thing which is important also, the percentile. Now if you see the door that we have, which we use to enter and exit a particular space, a particular room or building. So now people, for example, if you take India, there are people like a child who is maybe 2 feet, 3 feet in height, to an average adult who is like 5 feet in height, to maybe somebody who's 7 feet tall as well. So the door, which is of around 7 feet of height, it allows somebody who's 2 feet to also enter, 5 feet to also enter and exit, and also allows a rare 7 feet tall person to also enter and exit. So that is how the door is determined, the height is determined. If we had a door of the height 5 feet, then it would be very difficult for a lot of people to enter. They will hit their head on it, or they will have to bend down and enter the door. So for different places and different entrances and different spaces, the different percentile rule will have to be used depending on the situation. So some of the guidelines for size and space for approach and use in particular, so these rules are to provide a clear line of sight to important elements for any seated or standing use. So the sight of line being important here, that for example, if we are waiting in a hospital lounge for our number, and the number is being displayed on the door of the doctor, so that board should be visible because the number is changing. So the patient, wherever they are sitting in that waiting lounge, they should be able to see that number, and when their number comes, they should be able to go to the doctor, because if they miss their chance, then it may come back much later. Next is to make reach to all components comfortable for any seated or standing use. So, any components that a person may require should be within reach. Next is to accommodate variations in hand and grip size. So, again, it depends on maybe the door handle, maybe the railing, maybe some chair or any other element that is in the environment, that it should allow for different types of hand and grip sizes. And finally, provide adequate space for the use of assistive devices or personal assistants. So, assistive devices, for example, somebody on a wheelchair, then the door width needs to be minimum so that the wheelchair can be accommodated, or if somebody is on the crutches, or if somebody has maybe a guide dog with them, or somebody who is holding their hand and walking with them. So, the entrance should be enough to accommodate all of these special cases as well. So, if we see the principles of universal designs, advantages and disadvantages, we can see that the advantages, that it increases the accessibility. So, it makes the place more accessible. So, one place which was accessible by a certain number of people is now accessible by more people. And broader user base, again, a larger number of people will be able to find more use in it. Improved user experience, so it will enhance the user experience, make it more positive experience. Legal compliance, so some legal requirements are there. For example, like I just mentioned, that the ramp has to be there in every government building, so there are some legalities, legal issues. And future proofing, so of course we all are aiming for a better future, so how to make how to improve that and ensure in future none of these problems take place. So, the disadvantages are that the design complexity, so there may be some complexity in the design, so that may be one of the challenges that may be there. Balancing trade-offs, so there will have to be some sort of a balance which will have to be done. There may be some pros and cons, and some balancing act will have to be done. Education and awareness, so now this is an area which still requires a little bit more awareness. People, because who especially are in the group with maybe disabilities or special needs, so they still are a minor number of people, they are a minor community, and of course minor communities generally go unnoticed. So, for that particular reason, the awareness becomes very important, that the people who do not fall in this category should also be able to understand the needs of this group and do something for giving them a better experience as well. And testing and validation becomes important, because testing and validation is imperative. We have to test it out, because if there is some fault, it may cause more hazard than what positive we are expecting out of it. So, an additional testing and validation may become an additional step in this particular case. So, we saw that accessible design refers to the design of facilities, products and services that comply with specific legal mandates, guidelines or codes for people with disabilities. There could be other types of special needs as well. And accessible design is legally driven, which means that specific legal requirements must be met to ensure the accessibility of facilities, products and services for individuals with disabilities. So, with this we come to the end of today's lecture, and I will see you in the next class. Thank you.